Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wadsworth Area School District, where we are student-centered and future-focused for a world-class education. The board work session of the November 13th, 2023 is now called to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Mrs. Burlingham.
Here.
Mrs. Farrell.
Here.
Mrs. Hetherington.
Here.
Mrs. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Mattson.
Here.
Mr. Morvay.
Here.
Mrs. Pound.
Here.
Dr. Pushchak.
Here.
Mr. Blozier.
Present. The chair recognizes Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Ken Berlin, for school reports. Will we have school reports next week?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Englert plans to recognize some of the excellence that happened this fall in athletics and other activities. I know he's invited some students, so looking forward to that and celebrating with the students their great achievements. And that's all we'll have for school reports.
Great, thank you. The next item on the agenda is guest and citizen comments. No one has signed up to speak to the board this evening. So the chair recognizes Dr. Ken Berlin for a superintendent's report.
Thanks, Mr. President. I just wanted to highlight one item on the agenda, and that would be item F2 under finance. Some good news for our families. The thresholds for the community eligibility program, which is free and reduced lunches, has been changed, and they're allowing mid-year waivers or applications from school districts. So we're recommending, because we now qualify for everyone in the district, K-12, to receive free lunch and breakfast, that the board approve a motion to submit that application, and that could become effective as soon as December 1st.
Nice.
So that would be a big boost for our families. It should help. So that was some good news, and I just wanted to share that, and that's all I have, Mr.
Great.
President.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board for Dr. Berlin? The chair recognizes Dr. Ken Berlin for the business administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mrs. Bendig is not here this evening. She'll join us next week with more complete reports, but you can see the balances are listed there for general fund, capital projects, and the cafeteria. Those funds continue to be healthy. We will be moving some money on this agenda proposed to finish off a few capital project bills from the summer, mainly the middle school sidewalk, so that the heat melt can be turned on. And then you can see in letter B under the business administrator's report that we have a series of checks that were written already, cafeteria and others, and of course the Seneca Activity Fund report, which is student-raised money for clubs and other activities. And Vicki will have the rest next week.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the board for Dr. Berlin on the financial reports? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you. There's one item on the agenda under legal advisement, LA1, for exoneration of delinquent property taxes. Is there any questions or discussion on the item under legal advisement? Hearing none, that item will be on our agenda for consideration next week. The chair recognizes Mr. Steve Morvay for finance.
Mr. President, currently there are 3 items under finance that will be on the agenda for next week. The first one is a budgetary transfer under F1, as noted in those bullet points, as Dr. Berlin mentioned, moving some of the funds around from uncommitted or unassigned, to various categories for safety, construction, and capital projects. That'll be item under F1. F2 2, as he indicated as well, the community eligibility provision, that'll be on our agenda for next week, as well as F3, preliminary general fund budget, which would be the accelerated budget opt-out resolution, which I think that has been made the rounds to the board members regarding the Act 1 certification, or procedures and the general index limit of what our budget, that's our first step in the budget process for the district. Those will be the 3 items, Mr. President, that'll be on the agenda for next week.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussions on the items under finance?
I just had one.
Mrs. Farrell? Mrs.
Did you
Morvay,
forget you
almost.
were?
I did.
And you're
I'm looking at Morvay saying Farrell.
I'm out.
Scrub that from the video there.
And cut.
For the 400,000 from unassigned fund balance for the paving and concrete projects, are those for upcoming projects or for the ones that have?
That's a good question. Those would be for future projects.
Okay.
And we may have recommendations to move additional funds for additional purposes, including paving and concrete, after we review the local audit, which is almost complete. So we'll probably take a look at that in January or early February. But we do think we're in a good budget position. Not overspent. We should have underspent the budget by a reasonable margin and be able to take care of a few more capital project items.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. President, I have one more question. Dr. Berlin, can you give us an update? I don't recall last meeting if the state budget had passed finally yet. It has now?
It has not. They are chipping away at pieces of it. The House and the Senate worked with Governor Shapiro, and I just read that yesterday, I believe it was, or no, it was this morning. They approved some medical access money that was part of that last $1 billion that hasn't been approved. But they also signaled that they're ready to move on the remaining education budget items, including the omnibus school code bill. House Bill 27 is the bill that had a lot of school code changes in it, hooked to pieces of, projects, favored initiatives of one side of the aisle or the other. It looks like they're going to throw House Bill 27 aside and draft something smaller and get some of those very partisan issues out of it so that they can pass the remaining
Because
budget.
I recall that had to do with how much funding we would actually receive, correct? Because it was an estimated at the time, back in the summer, when this budget was supposed to be done.
Yeah, correct. So the last $1 billion is for some increased mental health funds. I mean, for us, it's some supplementary things.
Okay.
But for some of the inner city, more needy school districts, infrastructure-wise, they would receive level up funds, which that's probably the largest portion of that $1 billion. And the idea there is to catch up some of those schools that have crumbling infrastructures. So we will benefit a little bit, but the big fight remains over private school vouchers, the rescue vouchers. So, and it looks like that is driving House Bill 27 to be set aside because they kept putting that back in.
Okay.
And it didn't matter what they put that in House Bill 27 with. The people could like this, the people could like that, but, you know, that was the sticking point. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Great, thank you.
I just have one comment.
Mrs. Powell?
The baseball team was very appreciative of getting the refund for the batting cages. I don't know if they said that to you guys, but they had said it to the boosters, so I just wanted to relay that.
Yeah, that's good to hear. We wanted to make sure that, you know, we recognize that they had put some work into that, and hopefully they can spend it on better things than a little bit of
Right.
concrete and wood.
Hearing no other questions, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Leah.
Okay, so this question is about F3, the accelerated budget opt-out resolution. So you're not saying that it's going to, so this isn't including this year, this will be for next year.
Correct.
The current rate is 3.39. You're not saying that it's going to go up to 7.3, you're just saying it's the maximum that it can be. But you're saying keep it at the same rate, or about.
Yes, you summarized
Or
that.
lower.
You summarized that well. The Act 1 index, it floats up and down every year, and it's based off of a formula, a lot of factors, inflation, socioeconomics, per capita income in a school district. So every district's Act 1 index,
The maximum or like the actual?
the max will fluctuate. Ours, that's the highest I've seen it. Well, I don't know if we printed it there. It might be in the,
It's in the update and on the,
right, yeah, 7.3%. That's the maximum. That's the highest I think I've seen it in my tenure here as superintendent. This is year 11. That just says you can go to that amount if you so choose, without going to a referendum. If you needed to go above that, you would have to apply for one of several exceptions. One is legacy building construction debt. The other is special ed costs, and the third would be pension costs. But our pension costs have started to level off, so there's really not much to be had there. And we have purchased back almost every special ed program, except maybe one. We run it in-house, and that's saved us a tremendous amount of money over the past 5 years. So there's not really anything available in the special ed exception to increase the amount that we could raise taxes if it were approved.
So with the vote, we're voting on agreeing that that upper limit is our upper limit. It's not saying that is
That's
the
not
tax
saying
rate.
that's actually gonna
That's
be
down the
our
road.
tax rate.
Exactly, that's down
Okay.
the road. We will vote on
In
that.
fact, your chart that you gave us, Dr. Berlin, we had 5.6 was our allowable limit, and we were at 3.34
3.9.
actual when it was
yeah,
all said
I
and
just
done.
needed a little clarification because when I
Yeah.
read it at first, I was like,
That's
what?
basically the guardrails. That's the guardrails.
Yeah, it's the upper bumper. I mean, the only other way you can go above that is with a voter referendum.
Just for reference, I looked it up because I was curious if it was statewide or just our district. So each district has their own, and all of our local districts are between 6.4 and 8.2, so they're high this year for everybody.
And that really reflects the inflation that's going on at the moment.
But the recommendation is not to go to that.
Yeah, we want to, we're saying we're not going above that. We'll balance the budget within that
Okay.
amount.
Any other questions? Those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mr. Morvay. The chair recognizes Mr. Sean Mattson for Building and Grounds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will have 2 items under Buildings and Grounds next week. The first one is B1, the security system indoors, which is outlined below, and B2, the snow melts for the middle school walkway, which is outlined below. And that's all I'll have.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions on the items under Building and Grounds? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mr. Mattson.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Ms. Nicole Lee for Personnel.
Thank you, Mr. President. For next week, I will have 8 items. They will include P1, substitute additions, P2, service personnel substitute list, P3, resignations, P4, appointments, P5, tuition reimbursement, P6, Bayada agreement for nurse substitutes, P7, leave requests, and P8, conference requests.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the items under Personnel? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mrs. Lee. The chair recognizes Ms. Amanda Farrell for Policy.
I have no items, Mr. President.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Dr. Andy Pushchak for curriculum.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I have one item under curriculum, that is the school calendar for 24-25 school year. And I just have one question. I think this is poorly worded, or I don't understand. My understanding would be that on the 27th and the 28th, we'd have one group of kindergartners come on the 27th, one group come on the 28th, but the resolution reads, for the dismissal at the start of the school year for a partial group of kindergarten students as outlined. There's nothing that's as outlined because this is the link here, so is there some clarification we can have on that
I think
agenda
that's
item?
intended to refer to, for our kindergarten students, which on the draft that you find in your folders, the first student day is the 26th, the second student day is the 27th. Historically, our kindergartners have been split in half, with half coming the first day of school, the second half coming the second, and then the entire group coming the third day. So I think that that's what that statement is trying to say. It's just, as you said, not worded correctly, and the dates are not correct.
So if we could correct the resolution C1 prior to next week, that would be helpful.
Well, yeah, and in fact, the document that was posted publicly on our website had an error in it. I believe it was short a day or two, which I don't think the students would have pointed out to us when we caught it. So the calendar that's here available at the meeting and that you have in your folders, that should be the finalized proposed calendar. And then, yes, certainly we can make that Act 80 kindergarten half-day attendance more, clear. We can word that better and correct the dates.
That's all I have, Mr. President. With that corrected resolution under C1, we should be good to go for curriculum.
Thank you. Is there any other question or discussion on the calendar? Hearing none, that item will be on our agenda next week for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Pushak. The chair recognizes Ms. Leah Hetherington for technology.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing on the agenda for this week.
Thank you, Ms. Hetherington. The chair recognizes Ms. Brittany Burlingham for transportation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will have one item underneath transportation next week, which is T1 transportation requests, and that will be all I have.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the transportation requests? Hearing none, that item will be on our agenda next week for consideration. Thank you, Mrs. Burlingham. The chair recognizes Ms. Tara Pound for athletic and extracurricular.
Thank you. I'll have 3 items next week: AE1, the volunteer list; AE2, athletic resignation; and AE3, extracurricular resignation. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the items under athletic and extracurricular? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. There is nothing on the agenda under miscellaneous at this time. Will we have an Erie County Technical School report next week, Mr. Morvay?
Yes, Mr. President, that will be a review of our October board meeting at the tech school. We'll have that next week at our board meeting.
Thank you. And for the Northwest Intermediate Unit, will we have a report next week, Dr. Pushak?
Ditto, Mr. President. I'll report out on the October meeting.
Thank you. That brings us to board correspondence and dialogue. Anything from the board this evening?
Mr. President?
Dr. Pushak.
I'll wait till next week to celebrate our fantastic fall sports seasons, of which I attended many. But I did want to point out that I attended the Wattsburg Area Middle School open house, and my wife attended the, not open house, parent-teacher conference, and my wife attended the elementary school parent-teacher conference, and we were both very impressed by the teacher's presentation of our student assessment data for our individual students, reflecting where our students are based upon the assessments that have been given to them, where they would like them to be, what areas they need to work on. It was at a level that if I could understand it, I think most parents could. So I wanted to compliment Mrs. Kelly on her hard work on that, working with the principals and teachers, because that was a question I had when we had our presentations. How are we getting this information out to our parents? And I was most impressed, particularly with the middle school conversations I had with the ELA and math teachers. So another bright spot in our district to highlight and to showcase, and compliments the administration and the teachers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Amanda.
Second, Pushchak.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.